Let's take a look at functional harmony, meaning the harmonized major scale in its simplest form, okay? Take the key of C major. You have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. They sound like this. All right, now if you go to the fifth note of that C scale, you get G. And the relationship between those two notes is very consonant. It's very easy on the ears. It's very stable. It's called a perfect fifth. Now, the perfect fifth has a lot of uses in music. First and foremost, if you're a bass player, you're oftentimes going to play the root and the perfect fifth as a go-to note, no matter what chord you're on. It's always like the note you can go to. It's guaranteed to work most of the time. It always sounds good on its own. Now, power chords played by guitar players are also made up of those same two notes, the root and the fifth. So the root and the fifth get along great. Now, the interesting thing about the fifth is that its neighbor just down the road by one house is known as the diminished fifth. All right, there's your diminished fifth. So here's the perfect fifth. It's all happy, and then suddenly not so happy anymore. So this is much more of a sour sound. It's awkward. It almost sounds like a truck horn as you're about to get hit from behind. They want beeping to get the hell out of the way. Very dissonant, the opposite of the perfect fifth. And the really interesting thing is that they're just a half step different from each other. You know, you're on the root, perfect fifth, you bring that perfect fifth down by a half step, suddenly you have the most awkward sounding note combination. One of the most awkward note combinations in music. This one has a very specific function in music, in functional harmony, in songwriting, in chord construction, because it's one of the intervals involved in the dominant seventh chord. So let's continue with the C major scale. You've got your one chord, C major, and again, that fifth that we've been talking about is the foundation for the five chord. The fifth note is the fifth interval. It is the perfect fifth, but we'll also call it the five chord. It's the starting note of the five chord, and the five chord is G. But if we want to get like really authentic, we're going to make it a G7. Now it has four notes, G, B, D, F. Now the thing that's cool about chords is that chords are constructed of different intervals. Okay, some chords will have the same interval distance between all the notes, like for example, the diminished chord, diminished seventh chord specifically, has a minor third distance between all the notes. Very interesting symmetrical chord. Most chords don't have that same distance between all the notes. The dominant seventh chord has a major third between the 1 and 3. It has a minor third between the 3 and 5, and then it has another minor third between the 5 and minor 7. That minor seventh interval is what gives that G7 its signature sound. Essentially, when you hear a seventh chord, you're going to be met with a lack of resolution, a lack of stability. Now, there's nothing wrong with the chord itself. Blues music uses dominant seventh chords almost exclusively. The use of the tritone, the use of the flat 5, which is just another name for the tritone, will use this as part of its signature sound. Let's get into what actually is causing that instability, okay? If you look at the distance between the B and the F, that is a tritone. That will have the same quality of sound as the previous tritone that we played, which was the C and the F sharp or G flat. So that is the flat 5, also known as the tritone, in the original key of C that we were doing. But now we're looking at the G7 chord specifically. And again, if we remove the G and the D, we end up with that same flat 5 interval. It's that flat 5 interval that gives that chord its instability, its need to resolve. You know, dominant 7th chords are the most active chords in music, at least Western music, because of the fact that they call for resolution. Music, good music, is about starting somewhere, typically kind of safe and sane, and then, you know, traveling through the sonic landscape, maybe throwing in a diminished chord here and there, maybe throwing in some sus chords for color. But ultimately, when it comes time to resolve a piece of music and bring it back home, kind of like baseball, first base, second base, third base, back home, you need to get back home. How do you get back home? You get back home by using that dominant 7th chord. And again, the reason it's so powerful is because it contains that tritone, or that flat 5 interval. It is the 3rd and 7th chord tone of the G7 chord, which is the 5 chord in the key of C. And this works for all dominant chords. It doesn't matter if they're in the key that you're in, or if they're, you know, a secondary dominant. It doesn't matter. A dominant chord is a dominant chord. All the intervals used, they're all in all of the dominant chords. So now let's get into like the real nuts and bolts of what's going on with the dominant 7th chord. Okay, notes in certain chords want to resolve to notes in other certain chords. Now if I play a G chord to a C chord, it doesn't have the same effect. Right, here's just a G triad to a C major triad. Technically I'm doing a 5-to-1, but it doesn't have the strong pull that we're looking for. Now I'm going to play the G7 to the C. Suddenly, that chord has been given the necessary magnetism, screaming for resolution back to the 1 chord. Now, what is actually resolving here? If you look at the notes of the G7, G, B, D, F, you'll notice that the B is next door neighbors with the C. And that half-step resolution, that half-step distance, is begging that B to go home to C. So the 3rd of the G7 becomes the point at which it resolves back to the 1 of the C chord, of the 1 chord. And then you also have, up above, on the 7th note of the G7, you have the F. That F is a half step away from E, which is just lower by a half step. That screams to jump back from being the 7th in G7 to the 3rd in C major. So there's 2 notes involved in the G7 chord that want to resolve back home to the 1 chord via 2 of the notes in the 1 chord. So let's just say it again. The G7 chord is G, B, D, F. The F wants to resolve to E. The B wants to resolve up to C. And of course, those 2 notes are the first 2 notes in the C major chord, the 5th essentially being filler. So that is why we typically, in Western music, will use the 5-to-1 cadence, the authentic perfect cadence, so often to resolve a piece of music. Now, there's no rules that say you have to do that. Some songs will resolve to the 4 chord. Some songs will resolve to the parallel major or minor of whatever key you're in. Some songs might not resolve to anything. They might just trail off into some weird drone and then end, you know, ambiguously. But in terms of like what we know works and why it works, this is very powerful stuff. So again, to recap, you have the major scale. The 5th note of the scale represents the basis for the power chord, which is the root and 5th. As a bass player, you play root and 5th. And then in terms of chord construction, you have the dominant 7th chord as the 5 chord in any major key, and technically any harmonic minor key that works as well. And so it's those intervals in that G7 chord that want to magnetically resolve themselves to the same notes in the C major chord, which happens to be the 1 chord. So it's not just dumb luck that it works. There's like literally stuff going on there intervallically, and I like to call it magnetism just to make it more exciting. But it's really good stuff. So dominant function in terms of chords, tritone / flat 5 in terms of intervals. 2 different ways to look at it. It's all the same thing. It's great stuff. I hope this made sense to you guys. If you're still here, please let me know you're still here. Let me know what you thought of the video. Hit the like button, please, because YouTube is brutal. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.